No one ever imagined that Peaches's final moments would ignite a new nightmare, one born from a secret buried so deeply it was never meant to surface. With a single letter written on the edge of her fading breath, she unleashed a confession so devastating it shattered every bond that once seemed unbreakable. The moment Ted's eyes traced those trembling lines, the world he knew collapsed, forcing everyone into a vortex of suspicion, betrayal, and the horrifying truth about Leslie. From that point on, there was no turning back. A new chaos emerged, darker, sharper, and far more ruthless than anyone ever expected. This is no longer a story of loss. This is the moment every hidden truth detonates. Ted had imagined many terrible things during the final hours after Peaches's death, but nothing could have prepared him for the weight of the envelope resting in his hands. It was thin, almost fragile, as if the paper itself carried the last trace of her breath. The moment he recognized her handwriting, something inside him cracked open, guilt he had avoided, questions he had buried, and a fear he could not yet name. He hesitated before opening it, sensing that the truth sealed inside would not only shatter what he believed about her death but tear through the fragile threads of loyalty that still held the broken group together. When he finally unfolded the letter, Peaches's final confession bled into his mind with a slow, suffocating clarity. She had written it in a trembling, uneven hand, the ink revealing her desperation and dread. And at the center of the confession, wrapped in sorrow, bitterness, and regret, was Leslie. Not as the friend she had always pretended to be, but as the silent architect behind a chain of cruelty that Peaches had carried alone until her last moment. Ted felt the blood drain from his face as he read the truth. Leslie had been manipulating them all, weaving lies and alliances that served only her obsession with control. Peaches had uncovered something catastrophic, something she had hesitated to reveal while alive, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of love twisted into guilt. But on the edge of death, she had finally released the truth, hoping it might save someone, even if it could no longer save her. Ted's grief twisted into a raw fury that pulsed beneath his skin. Each sentence in the letter felt like a blade carving into everything he thought he knew. He replayed moments he had dismissed, strange encounters, whispered excuses, the look in Leslie's eyes whenever the topic shifted toward loyalty or betrayal. He realized now that Peaches had been living with a secret heavy enough to crush anyone, and she had died carrying the burden of knowing that Leslie's darkest act was still hidden. The thought made Ted's stomach churn. He felt betrayed not only by Leslie but by himself, by his ignorance, by his inability to see what was unfolding around him. As he reread the letter, his anger deepened into something darker. Peaches described the slow erosion of trust she had experienced, the mounting fear that Leslie was pushing her toward the margins of their lives, reshaping the dynamics between them with a subtle but relentless precision. And then came the revelation that snapped the thin thread holding Ted's composure. Peaches had uncovered Leslie's involvement in a plan that risked more than emotional harm, something that tied directly into the string of toxic events that had unfolded in their circle. A plan so reckless, so morally twisted, that it had driven Peaches into a corner where she felt she had no one left to turn to. Ted sank onto the edge of his bed, gripping the letter so tightly the paper began to tear. He imagined Peaches alone, terrified, writing these words as her body failed her. The injustice of it ignited a deep, uncontainable rage. His mind raced with questions. What exactly had Leslie hoped to accomplish? How far had she been willing to go? And how many more lies lay buried beneath the surface, waiting to detonate? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how thoroughly Leslie had manipulated them all, playing on their insecurities, their fears, their loyalties. The anger grew until it clouded Ted's judgment. His breathing became uneven. Peaches had trusted him enough to leave this final truth in his hands, but she had also left him with the unbearable weight of deciding what to do with it. Exposing Leslie would ignite a war within their fragile community. Staying silent would mean betraying Peaches's last wish. Ted felt trapped, caught between vengeance, justice, guilt, and a hollow ache of loss that throbbed deep in his chest. As night fell, Ted's thoughts spiraled further into a maze of internal conflict. Every memory of Leslie clashed violently with the truth revealed in the letter. He recalled how she had always seemed to pivot effortlessly between vulnerability and control, shaping every situation to her advantage. Now he saw that her every gesture had concealed a deeper motive. The realization left him nauseous. He wondered how long she had been manipulating them, how many decisions he had made under the influence of her carefully crafted illusions. His mind conjured the image of Peaches lying in her hospital bed, alone and frightened, wishing she had spoken sooner. That image fueled a wildfire inside him. He felt an almost physical urge to confront Leslie, to force the truth out of her, to make her feel even a fragment of the pain she had caused. But beneath the fury simmered another emotion, fear. Fear that confronting Leslie would unleash consequences even more destructive than the lies themselves. Fear that exposing her might spiral into chaos that no one could control. Ted rose from his chair and began pacing, his thoughts racing. He replayed the events leading up to Peaches's death with a newfound clarity, noticing details that once seemed insignificant, Leslie's sudden defensiveness, her emotional volatility, the moments she isolated Peaches under the guise of concern. It was as if Leslie had been constructing a wall around Peaches, controlling the flow of truth, shaping the narrative. The more Ted examined the patterns, the more horrifying they became. The weight of Peaches's final words pressed harder against his conscience. She had described the moment she realized she was in danger, not physical danger, but the kind that eats away at a person's soul. She had written of the overwhelming panic when she connected the final dots, the chilling knowledge that Leslie had crossed a boundary that could never be undone. Ted felt sick. He wondered whether Peaches had suffered not just from the poison spreading through her body but from the emotional torment of knowing that someone she loved had betrayed her so profoundly. Ted's internal conflict intensified. The desire for justice warred with the instinct for self-preservation. He felt torn between honoring Peaches's last plea and protecting himself from the chaos that would follow. His hands trembled as he held the letter, as if the truth itself was alive, pulsing, demanding action. Leslie's name seemed to echo in his mind, each repetition sharper than the last. He imagined her reaction if she learned that Peaches had confessed everything. Would she deny it? Twist the truth again? Lash out in desperation? The uncertainty gnawed at him. Every possible outcome carried its own danger, each more volatile than the last. Ted's thoughts drifted to the others, Haley, Bill, Vernon, Eva. How many of them had unknowingly become entangled in Leslie's schemes? How many had suffered consequences they still did not understand? The realization that everyone had been living under the shadow of her manipulations filled Ted with a cold, relentless dread. It was no longer just about Peaches. It was about the integrity of their entire circle. As the night deepened, Ted's anger coiled into something sharper, more focused. He felt the beginnings of a decision forming, dangerous, inevitable. But even then, he sensed the cost. Confronting Leslie would shatter everything. It would mean ripping open wounds that had barely begun to heal. It would force everyone to face truths they were not prepared to acknowledge. But remaining silent would mean abandoning Peaches in death, just as he had failed to protect her in life. The conflict tore at him until exhaustion forced him into a restless sleep. But even then, the letter haunted him, its revelations echoing through his dreams. When he woke, the world felt different, colder, darker, and more dangerous. He knew the truth could not be contained. It was a ticking fuse, and Leslie was the spark waiting to ignite it. In the aftermath of everything that had unraveled, the silence felt heavier than any accusation. Ted stood at the edge of a life that no longer resembled the one he knew, carrying the weight of Peach's final confession like a wound that refused to close. The truth about Leslie had festered for years in the shadows, and now that it had been dragged into the light, nothing around them remained intact. The fractures in their relationships had deepened into irreversible chasms, leaving each of them isolated in their own turmoil. Yet beneath the devastation lay a grim clarity. The cycle of fear, manipulation, and silence had finally been broken. Ted understood that confronting the truth meant accepting the cost, no matter how brutal. As he walked away from the ruins of everything he once trusted, he carried with him a resolve forged from pain, not to heal the past, but to make sure its darkness would never be repeated. And in that final, fragile stillness, the story closed not with peace, but with the unmistakable sense that some revelations change you forever.